Good afternoon. She is everything the Hollywood dream claimed to offer: composure, beauty, a kind of radiant self-possession that the cameras cannot quite capture and cannot stop trying to. Tonight, I am here with Rowan Hartsteele.
Good evening, Clara.
A woman who had, by any conventional measure, achieved everything she could have wanted, and who then walked away from it for something that looked, from the outside, like an even greater prize. Tonight, we turn to a life that moved between two worlds, Hollywood and Monaco, cinema and royalty, the image a woman projected and the person she was underneath it. The question tonight is not what Grace Kelly became, but what it cost her to become it.
In 5 years, Grace Kelly moved from an unknown acting student to an Academy Award winner, and then, with a speed that astonished even Hollywood, from an actress to the Princess of Monaco. She was 26 years old when she left Hollywood permanently. She would not make another film. The transformation was total, and by most accounts irreversible.
We are speaking about Grace Kelly,
one of the most celebrated actresses of the 1950s, and one of the most recognizable women in the world for the 3 decades that followed. A figure whose life raises questions about identity, expectation, and the price of becoming a symbol.
Then let us begin at the beginning, with the world she came from, and the qualities it shaped in her.
Grace Patricia Kelly was born in November of 1929 in Philadelphia, into a family of considerable ambition and considerable success. Her father, Jack Kelly, was a self-made man of extraordinary drive, an Irish-American bricklayer's son who had built a construction empire, won 3 Olympic gold medals in rowing, and become one of the most prominent figures in Philadelphia society. Her mother, Margaret, was a former model and physical education instructor who had converted to Catholicism upon marriage, and who brought to the household an emphasis on discipline, appearance, and the proper management of how one was perceived.
So the household she grew up in was defined by achievement, and by the appearance of achievement.
Yes, and Grace was not, in that household, the obvious star. Her father admired her older brother, Jack Jr. most openly. Her sister Peggy was considered the beauty of the family. Grace was the quiet one, somewhat shy, prone to illness as a child, not the figure who commanded a room, but she had something that registered differently on camera than it did in person. She had discovered from an early age that she could perform, and that performance gave her something ordinary life did not, a kind of freedom within a frame.
So acting was an escape as much as a vocation.
Yes, she enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York in 1947, at 18. Over the quiet disapproval of her father, who did not consider acting a suitable ambition for a Kelly, she supported herself initially with modeling work, appearing in magazine advertisements, and developing the visual vocabulary of her public image. The pale hair, the composed expression, the suggestion of something contained behind an elegant exterior. She began working in television and theater before her first significant film roles arrived. When they did, the response was immediate.
So her screen presence was recognizable from the beginning.
Yes, her film career accelerated with unusual speed. High Noon in 1952, opposite Gary Cooper, brought her serious critical attention, but it was her collaboration with Alfred Hitchcock that defined her screen identity most completely. Hitchcock recognized in Grace Kelly something he had been looking for, and had not quite found in other actresses. He called it the fire behind ice, a woman who appeared cool and remote on the surface, but whose responses, when they came, were startlingly present.
So Hitchcock was drawn to the same quality that made her difficult to read in person.
Yes, they made 3 films together: Dial M for Murder and Rear Window in 1954, and To Catch a Thief in 1955. Each one elaborated a version of her persona that was simultaneously accessible and unreachable. The woman who was present in the frame, but always seemed to be thinking something she had not said. And between those Hitchcock films, she delivered the performance that would define her professionally. In 1954, she played Georgie Elgin in The Country Girl, opposite Bing Crosby, a role that required her to appear exhausted, unglamorous, and morally conflicted.
So the performance that won her the Academy Award was deliberately against the image she had built.
Yes. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1955 for that role, one of the youngest winners at the time. At that moment, she was at the absolute peak of her career. Hollywood wanted her for everything. She had the professional freedom that very few actresses of her era possessed, and she seemed, from every public angle, to embody a kind of perfection. The right background, the right talent, the right face, the right moment in history to make use of all of them.
So from the outside everything had arrived.
Yes. And then just months after that Academy Award, came the meeting that would take her in an entirely different direction. In May of 1955, the Cannes Film Festival was underway, when a photo opportunity was arranged for Grace Kelly to meet Prince Rainier III of Monaco. Monaco was a tiny principality on the French Riviera, governing itself under an ancient treaty that allowed it to maintain independence from France, only as long as it remained under the rule of the Grimaldi family. Rainier was 31st and reigning prince with the specific and pressing problem of needing to produce an heir. A clause in the treaty with France specified that if the Grimaldi line ended, Monaco would revert to French sovereignty.
So his need for a wife and an heir was not merely personal.
Yes. And the meeting with Grace Kelly was arranged by the magazine Paris Match as a publicity event. She nearly did not go. Her schedule was complicated, her clothes were not ready, the arrangement felt awkward. But she went, and the photographs taken that afternoon were among the most reproduced images of the decade. Rainier was apparently captivated. Correspondence followed. By the end of 1955, the relationship had accelerated into something that the media had already decided was the perfect story. The Hollywood actress and the real prince.
So the narrative was already being written before either of them had made any definitive decision.
Yes. And this is one of the more important things to understand about her story. Grace Kelly had spent her adult life managing a gap between who she was and who she was required to appear to be. Hollywood had made her into an image. That image was extremely valuable, and it constrained her as much as it elevated her. Monaco offered something that on the surface looked like an escape from performance, a real life, a real title, a real family.
And yet the role she was being offered in Monaco was perhaps even more demanding than the one she was leaving.
Yes, in January of 1956 the engagement was announced. The world responded with the enthusiasm the media had been priming it for. She arrived in Monaco in April by ocean liner, surrounded by what appeared to be a trousseau of cinematic proportions. The marriage ceremony in April 1956 was broadcast on television and watched by 30 million people across Europe and America. And Grace Kelly became Princess Grace of Monaco.
So the actress stepped off the screen and into a role from which there was no final cut.
Yes, and the differences between those two worlds became apparent quickly. In Hollywood, she had chosen her roles, negotiated her contracts, and maintained at least some degree of control over the projects she associated herself with. In Monaco, her function was defined by her position. The Princess of Monaco attended official events, represented the principality, supported charities, produced children, and embodied the dignity the Grimaldi title required. She had 3 children: Caroline in 1957, Albert in 1958, and Stephanie in 1965.
So she fulfilled the dynastic requirement completely.
Yes, but the transition was not without its difficulties. Those who knew her in those early years in Monaco described a woman who was adapting carefully and quietly, but who found certain elements of her new life genuinely difficult. She had left behind her career, her city, her friendships, her language in the sense of the cultural shorthand of American life, and stepped into a world where she was a foreigner in every practical sense, expected to represent an institution she had barely known 6 months before her marriage.
So beneath the surface of the fairy tale was something much more demanding.
Yes, and the media, which had celebrated the transition with such enthusiasm, continued to watch her with the same intensity. The press did not stop being interested in Grace Kelly because she had become Princess Grace. If anything, the fascination increased. Every appearance was documented. Her weight, her wardrobe, her relationships with her husband and children, her occasional expressions of longing for her former life. All of it was material for a public narrative that she had no ability to control.
So, the scrutiny of Hollywood had been replaced by the scrutiny of royalty, which was in some ways even more total.
Yes, a film career could end, royal marriage and its obligations did not. There were moments in the 1960s when she spoke to trusted friends about the possibility of returning to film. Hitchcock approached her for Marnie in 1964. The Monegasque public reacted with hostility to the idea. Rainier was reportedly not supportive. The project was abandoned. It would be the last serious conversation about a return to acting she would have in.
So the role she had left for was also a cage, though a gilded one.
That is perhaps too stark a framing. The picture is more complicated. Over the years she found genuine purpose in her role. She became deeply involved in the cultural and charitable life of Monaco. She was a founding member of the arts organization that became the Princess Grace Foundation. She supported young artists, designers, and performers with a seriousness that reflected her own artistic background. Those who worked with her on these projects described her as engaged, knowledgeable, and genuinely committed.
So she found ways to remain connected to the creative world she had left.
Yes, and her presence transformed Monaco's international profile in ways that no political or economic strategy could have replicated. Before Princess Grace, Monaco was a pleasant but minor principality known primarily for its casino. Her arrival made it a destination of glamour, a site of cultural aspiration, a place that appeared in the same sentence as Paris and Hollywood. She did for Monaco's global image what decades of tourism campaigns could not have done, and she did it simply by being there and being herself.
So her value to Monaco was real and considerable, beyond the dynastic requirements she had already fulfilled.
Yes, but the personal cost of that value is where the story becomes more difficult to read. The image of Princess Grace was in many respects as constructed as the image of Grace Kelly, the actress, had been. The public saw serenity, elegance, poise. Those who knew her privately described a woman who struggled with loneliness, with the constraints of her position, and with a marriage that became more formal over time. She was not unhappy in any single simple sense, but the gap between the life she was seen to have and the life she was actually living was substantial, and she was skilled enough at performance to maintain that gap with almost no visible effort.
So the composure that had made her a great actress was also what allowed her to sustain the role of princess under conditions that would have been visible as difficulty on a less disciplined person.
Yes, the same quality was serving two entirely different purposes. By the late 1970s and into the early 1980s, she was in her late 40s and early 50s. She had begun to speak more openly in interviews about the complexity of her situation, not with bitterness but with a directness she had not always permitted herself. She spoke of missing the creative freedom of her former life. She continued her work with the Arts Foundation. She gave poetry readings in public, a form that allowed her to perform in a context that was culturally acceptable for a princess.
So even at the end of her life, she was finding the narrow spaces within her role, where expression remained possible.
Yes. And then in September of 1982, she was driving with her younger daughter Stephanie on a mountain road above Monaco, when the car left the road and went over the edge. Grace Kelly did not survive. She was 52 years old. Stephanie survived with injuries. The cause of the accident was never definitively established. She had reported feeling unwell, and medical evidence gathered afterward suggested she may have experienced a small stroke that caused her to lose control of the vehicle.
So the end came on a road between Monaco and her former world, in the physical landscape that had defined her second life.
Yes, she had been a cultural constant for nearly 30 years, a figure who had not appeared on a cinema screen since 1956, and yet remained one of the most recognized women in the world.
Before we close tonight, let us take a brief pause and welcome Margaret Evernight. Margaret, for those who want to understand Grace Kelly beyond the image and beyond the fairy tale, where would you invite them to begin?
Thank you, Clara. In this case, the most direct path is also the most important one. I would suggest beginning with High Society, Grace Kelly and Hollywood by Donald Spoto.
So this is a biography that addresses both the Hollywood years and the transformation that followed.
It is a detailed biography exploring Grace Kelly's life, career, and transformation from film star to princess. Spoto is a biographer who takes his subjects seriously as complex human beings rather than icons, and he is consistently more interested in what Grace Kelly experienced than in what she represented.
Is it accessible to a reader who is primarily interested in her as a cultural figure rather than as a film historian?
Entirely. Spoto writes with the readability of a novelist and the precision of a researcher. He's particularly good at the years in Monaco, which are often treated as a postscript to the Hollywood story, but which he treats as the central drama they actually were.
So reading it gives you the person behind the image, which is precisely what the image was designed to conceal.
Precisely, and that is the only place where the full meaning of her life can finally be found.
Thank you, Margaret. That is a thoughtful place to pause tonight.
Thank you, Clara. It was a pleasure.
The legacy of Grace Kelly operates on two distinct levels that are worth separating carefully. The first is the cultural legacy of the image. Grace Kelly remains one of the most referenced figures in the iconography of elegance. Her wedding dress, designed by Helen Rose of MGM, influenced bridal fashion for decades. The Hermes Kelly bag was renamed in her honor, after she was photographed using it to conceal her pregnancy from paparazzi. The The image was so pervasive that a leather bag acquired her name and retains it today. Her influence on how certain ideas of femininity, composed beauty, controlled elegance, effortless dignity, are visualized in Western culture is difficult to overstate.
So the image outlived her and has continued to generate meaning independently of the person who created it.
Yes. And the second level is the more uncomfortable one. The story of Grace Kelly raises questions about the relationship between women, public expectation, and the cost of embodying a cultural ideal. She was valued from her childhood through her Hollywood career and her marriage, primarily for what she appeared to be. The performance of a certain kind of womanhood was not only her profession, it was the condition of her acceptance. And she was extraordinarily skilled at that performance. So skilled that the person performing it became almost invisible to those watching.
So the better she performed, the more completely the performance replaced her.
Yes, and this is the tension at the heart of her legacy. The Monaco she left behind is still shaped by her present. The Princess Grace Foundation continues to support artists. Her face remains one of the most commercially reproduced images of the 20th century. And yet very little of that legacy connects back to what she herself wanted, thought, or experienced. The person behind the image was carefully and continuously obscured by others and by herself, until the image was essentially all that remained in the public record.
So the conclusion her story insists upon is a quiet and uncomfortable one.
Yes, Grace Kelly did not leave one life behind. She exchanged one role for another. And sometimes, becoming a symbol means losing the person behind it.
Thank you for staying with us tonight. And thank you, Rowan, for guiding us through the two lives of a woman whose greatest performance may have been the one she gave every day for 26 years, without a script, without a director, and without an ending. She had chosen.
She spent her life being seen. What remains most difficult and most worth attempting is to see her.
If this conversation stayed with you, you are welcome to like, comment, and subscribe. You will find other episodes here where history, ideas, and power are approached slowly. Until next time, stay with us.